Hi, folks. This is Jason Pramas, and welcome to a segment I guess we can call DigBoston on Books. I'm the executive editor of DigBoston, hence the name. And tonight we're going to do a fast interview with my longtime friend and colleague, Suren Moodliar, who's the co-author of a new book. And I'll just pull it up here so you can see the cover. It's called A People's Guide to Greater Boston. So without really any further ado, let's bring on Suren and talk to him about the book. Suren, welcome to this show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, great. So obviously I'm well aware after you've spent, 3 years now on the book? Is that right?
Nope. 2014, 6
Oh,
years.
wow. Longer than I even realized. And you co-authored the book with Eleni Makrakis and Joe Nevins, right?
Yeah.
And it's with University of California Press, and it's called A People's Guide to Greater Boston, yes?
Yeah, it's part of a series of books called the People's Guide series. The first book came out in 2012 called The People's Guide to Los Angeles. After our book comes out, it's out now in 2020, there'll be 2 or 3 more on San Francisco, on New York City, and one or 2 other places as well. Yeah.
But this is the only one that you're going to have to work on, right? So.
Yeah. Well, the only one of this series, yeah, definitely.
But you are working on other books, which we can, I guess, discuss.
Yeah, just a whole lot of books. In fact, on Wednesday, another book comes out called Turnout, Mobilizing Voters in an Emergency.
Oh, great. Then we can have you back on for another segment to talk about that book. But for this book, which you spent almost 6 years on, and is now just coming out, what was the motivation for doing it? And how did you meet your co-authors?
Okay. It's a very straightforward story. My co-author, Joe Nevins, was contacted by the University of California Press by Laura Pulido, author of the first book on Los Angeles, People's Guide to Los Angeles. And she wanted to know about folks who'd be interested in working on a book on Boston. Joe, having grown up in Dorchester, was very interested, and he invited me on board. He knew me since our days together at UCLA, where we were part of something called at various times, the Radical Student Alliance and the Network for Public Education and Social Justice. So we had a long history together as activists, did union organizing work together, and wanted to bring, those kinds of experiences to our consideration of Boston. And Eleni, our co-author, was initially a student of Joe's, and she had graduated and then joined our project initially to help very much on a narrow dimension, which is getting photos. Our book consists of several hundred photos in addition to 150 discrete entries. And Eleni slipped into actually helping with the research and then actually becoming a full author by coming up with sites and ideas for how we would approach them. So that's the sort of narrow story of the book. Whenever you have 3 people working on one thing, there are at least 3 origins to it. And so for me, my own work previously on Boston, which overlaps with a lot of work you've done, sort of led me to a deeper appreciation of Boston's history. I could just keep going, should I?
Yes, please. I mean, I think we're running. DigBoston is running a book review by one of our reviewers, Max Chapnick, shortly. But we wanted to flesh out, more of what the book's about, here in multimedia land. So by all means, please talk about the book.
Sure. Well, before we get to the book, then sort of telling you how it is I came to be interested in working on a book like this, right?
Indeed.
And so, excuse me, kind of with a cough isn't a very isn't a very nice thing. Let's see. I began working on the book primarily because I was interested in coming to terms with how the city's present situation, its inequalities, its struggles for justice, how it is they came to be, how it is that over at least 400 years since the European invasion. People have been struggling against the system, changing things, making improvements in their lives, quality of lives of lots of people, and yet never quite achieving things. So Boston is probably as unequal as ever in terms of its history, and certainly among the most unequal of cities in the United States. And so understanding this inequality, which has real meaning for people's lives, required, I think, both a geographical view and an historical view, and that's exactly what the book provides.
Great, great. And so it does this basically. You have an introduction, but then you move right into essentially a whole bunch of different sites, and you have explication in each one. So
yeah.
What would be a couple of your favorite examples from the book?
Yeah. So the book essentially consists of a framing essay, and then 65 discrete entries about different sites throughout what we call the Greater Boston area. And then we have, concluding the book, 6 tours of Boston, things like a 1% tour, a native tour, a Sacco and Vanzetti tour, and things like this. One thing that might be of interest in the present political moment is a Martin and Malcolm tour, which looks at the different parts of the city that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King inhabited, and not only so much helped shape, but parts of the city that may have helped shape them. Mm-hmm. So we have these different sites. We researched well over 250 sites and had a much larger list to choose from based on discussions with people like yourself, your right. Co-publisher Chris Ferrone and others. Yep. So we literally thank about 200 to 300 different people in this book because they all provided information about different sites that were worth pursuing and worth looking at. My favorite site is a bit obscure and speaks to my idiosyncrasies, and it's definitely not the favorite site of my co-authors, is a place called the Marlborough Hotel and Chapel. The Marlborough Chapel was found, if you were there in 1838 through 1852, on Washington Street, the corner of Washington Street and Bromfield, right in downtown. Do you remember that location? I think we went by there once.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly been by it before.
Yeah. So right across from the present Millennium Tower. Why is it my favorite location? This was the site of the first temperance hotel in the city of Boston, coincidentally founded by the guy who would go on to found the Boston Fire Department. He turned out to be an abolitionist as well. So temperance and abolition were really part of the left spectrum of that time, right? And when you think of those years, 1838 through 1852, this is in pre-Civil War America, right? Antebellum United States. And a lot of the events that lead up to the Civil War play out in Boston, and they were connected to other places, right? Why this place is interesting is that this was the heart of the abolitionist movement, but just as much as it was a place where the abolitionists met, and when they met there were often mobs who marched on this location trying to evict them from this space, denying them access to free speech, right? Yeah. But in addition to it being the heart of the abolitionist movement, this is where a number of people who were in the abolition movement gain their political experience, their sense of political efficacy, and they go on to be part of what later would be known as first wave feminism. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the people you'd read about, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and these people, the same place, right? So they were abolitionists, they were future suffragettes. It was also the place where the transcendentalist movement met. But in addition to that, when the U.S. went to war with Mexico, and U.S. goes to war with countries often, right?
I've heard this, yes.
Yes, right. So 1846 through 1848, we have this run up to the intervention in Mexico, and the anti-war movement of that time would also meet at that hotel, right, at this hotel in Chapel.
Right.
So it became a place for the cross-pollination of different currents of the movement. And so for that reason, I'm very interested in it. There are other sites in the book that we describe. One place called the Hidden Cupboard, a coffee shop that existed what is present-day Chinatown, and where all sorts of radicals would meet and yet played a role in defining our history.
Well, what is your hope for the book then? I mean, obviously it's focusing on a lot of sites that had political importance on the political left, over time, and cultural importance and social importance and other importances. But, I assume you're trying to speak to audiences today. Like, what audiences?
Yeah. Let me be funny and pretend to be really educated, which I'm not really. But there's a guy named Isaac Morrill, right? It's spelled Morrill,
Just
right?
move to your left a little tiny bit.
Okay.
There you go. That's good.
Hey, now I'm centered.
Yep.
So, talking about left and right, I want to talk about something that occurred before the references of left and right were available.
Mm-hmm.
In order to come back to the present, Isaac Morrill, all we know about him is that there's an entry in the court records for Ipswich that he was executed there. And this is at the end of the 1600s. And he was executed after having been accused of trying to foment rebellion in what was then the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And the kind of rebellion he wanted to incite, according to court records, is really interesting. He allegedly conspired with some indigenous people who were enslaved, as well as with some African people who were enslaved, right? And he was working with them. He himself was referred to as an orange man. And in that period, it apparently referred to people who were from Jersey. So yeah, was a white guy from Jersey, New Jersey, who was conspiring with people who were oppressed and exploited in Massachusetts. There's another wrinkle to it. He was also accused of conspiring with an enemy power, in this case, France. Right?
Yeah.
And France via the Mi'kmaq indigenous people, right?
Yep.
And that kind of coalition, which might have existed or was imagined in the fears of the people who accused Isaac Morrill of his crimes, that kind of coalition seems to emerge or be grasped at over many successive periods in Massachusetts history. A kind of unity of all oppressed and exploited people, right? Mm-hmm. And often seen as being, they're often portrayed as being agents of a foreign power. And so, just for my personal entry point, and I think the co-authors, is that we're interested in uncovering how it is that people who are very diverse network with one another, form coalitions, develop alternative worldviews, and push for something better. And I can't think of a more dangerous moment in our history as the present one, right? And where we need such coalitions and such movements. And for this reason, you can go through the book and find stories like that of Isaac Morrill, right? Unfortunately, the story of Isaac Morrill never made it into our book.
Oh,
we simply could not find enough information to be able to tell this story. So what I've told you is the most you'll find anywhere else in sort of published material right now.
Sure.
Right? So people have gone to the court records and then it gets lost. There are other Isaac Morrills in Massachusetts at that time, but they don't seem to be the same Isaac Morrill as the one in the court records. So we've lost the story, and so I don't think it's apocryphal in that there is a recording of an execution, but I think that kind of search for a grand coalition is something that's interesting. One would want to ask then, given the diversity of the people that Isaac Morrill allegedly was a provocateur in mobilizing, right? What would be the binding agent? What would be the glue that ties together these very different kinds of agencies? Indigenous people. One of the alleged co-conspirators was a woman, right? A woman slave, right? And race, ethnicity, all of these different things coming together to try to challenge the system, and so one would want to know what is the binding agent. And I think that when the different sites we visit, these are sites of working class struggle, and so in retelling those stories, I think that the binding agent across all these groups is common proletarianization, a common sort of life made tenuous and precarious by a system of capitalism. So I'd say that, in large part, these are the values that inform the book.
Great. Well, very timely indeed, considering what's going on right now in the world, although pretty much we certainly in our lifetimes, the two of us, it's been an ongoing struggle between working people and the people that control the commanding heights of politics and the economy. But it sounds like this could be a very helpful, window into history and ideas for people. And I assume that anybody can read this book pretty much. It doesn't require like a special education or anything to pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, this is my favorite book in one particular way. You can open to any page and start reading.
Yeah, I've done that.
You don't have to go to chapter 9 and refer back to the introduction to understand it.
Yeah.
It's a completely accessible book, and that's the same way in which we experience the city. We get off at a particular place, and as we walk through it, we begin to comprehend the city and encounter a sequence of sites and places that are jumbled up chronologically, but somehow have a relationship to one another. And that's the way the book's organized in many respects.
And do you hope people will kind of walk around the city with it, and kind of do their own tours?
Well, if they were wearing masks, yes.
Yes.
People walking around the city without masks.
I'm writing about masks again this week, as it happens. It'll be coming out on Thursday, although I'll put it online earlier. But yes. I mean that. We take that as given.
There are literally directions after each of the 160 or so entries from each tea stop. So it's a book that is written with a sense of what Boston is. And what Boston is for us is a city defined by its public transport. The city will rise and fall. So any site that you see, there are directions, walking directions from each of the the closest public stops.
Great. And do you offer tours yourself?
Until the coming of the COVID crisis, we were doing tours out of Encuentro Cinco.
Which is what now? Encuentro Cinco, for those that haven't heard of it?
Well, there are very few people who haven't heard of Encuentro
Well,
Cinco.
true, but just in case.
That one or two people that really isolate person. Encuentro Cinco is a movement building space, a place where different projects, nonprofits, and movements get together, and it's sort of combined office space, event space. And for 14 years, it operated in downtown Boston, out of first Chinatown, and then right by the Orpheum Theater. With the coming of COVID, though, it has relocated to Boylston and doesn't operate as a public space for the time being until we know what it will take to run a public space. Nonetheless, we were located right by the Orpheum Theater, and so it proved to be a really interesting location to walk from in order to introduce people to the sights of Boston.
Yeah, and we'll put information about Encuentro Cinco in the right with the video, of course, once it's up. And it's live right now, but it'll be up on our YouTube page later shortly. But where can go ahead, sir.
The best place to find out about the book is bostonbook.org.
Bostonbook.org, because I was going to ask you just now, where could people find the book? And that's where people can find the book, bostonbook.org. DigBoston.org. I'm impressed
Yeah.
you managed to get that URL. Any final thoughts?
No, not really, because if I were to start at that, it definitely wouldn't be a final thought; it would be an opening thought. So,
Okay.
so no, thank you for making the time, Jason.
Well, thanks very much, Suren Moodliar, the co-author of the book I'm going to just throw up here. And we bid you goodbye on this particular video. But here's the book cover, People's Guide to Greater Boston. And it's co-authored by Joan Evans, Eleni Makrakis, and our guest tonight, Suren Moodliar. So thanks again, Suren. And for those of you checking out this particular show, we're going to be doing more of them. And if anybody has people that they think we should interview about politics, culture, the arts, anything interesting happening in town, and you read us at DigBoston.com, and you think you know somebody who'd be good for this, please let me know. You can email me directly at execeditor, EXECEDITOR, at DigBoston.com. So again, this has been Jason Pramas. I'm the executive editor, as the email would imply, of DigBoston, and I hope you all have a good night and a good day, good week, good month, and stay safe. Bye, everybody.